The return of movie recaps. Today I will explain an offense. Thriller film from 2005, titled Revolver. There are spoilers ahead. Watch out and be cautious. Jake Green, a speculator from London, is eventually released from prison after serving 7 years, 2 decades, following his parole. He and his sibling Billy visit one of the region's most significant casinos. In the hopes of recovering the money owed to them by the proprietor, criminal leader Dorothy Matcha approached. He disregards the advice of his bodyguard Paul and permits Jake to join his private game. On the ascent, Jake hesitates to ride the elevator due to his apprehension, but his colleagues remind him to do so. They must ascend 20 floors, so he reluctantly takes the elevator despite his distress. Attack. Jake loses his first wager on a chip flip against another participant at the table. But this is deliberate. He is manipulating Matcha into a false sense of security so that when Matcha makes a move, he will be more vulnerable. This time, he wins the same wager with him. Billy and Jake rush out of the casino with their luggage. On their way out, they are stopped by Zach, who informs them that they're in trouble. Before providing Jake with his card, he determines that they are in peril and that he is able to assist them. This time, Jake chooses the staircase. However, before he can even take one stride, he passes out and collapses as the card's message is revealed. Utilize the elevator. Matcha conveys his concern to Paul as Jake is transported to the hospital. Jake must desire greater retribution after 7 years in prison, particularly after the incident with his father. Matcha orders Paul to employ the finest assassin in the industry to eliminate his brother-in-law. At the hospital, Jake is told that the blackout's cause could not be determined at first glance, so he is sent home. He should return home and recuperate while awaiting the results of his blood test. Billy visits his own residence, while Jake takes the bodyguards for security. They are all immediately slain upon arrival. The only reason he is able to escape is because he discovers a card on the ground that reads Dodge. Select, that is. Therefore, he bends over to do so. He attempts to flee in his vehicle, but the driver is on him. Fortunately, Zach arrives in time to save him and whisk him away. The assassin, Sorter, cannot comprehend how he missed, as he never misses, and hypothesizes that someone must have tipped him off. Go away. When he scolds Matcha, he explains that he missed because he had a poor shot. Meanwhile, Zach introduces Jake to his associate, Avi, who has gotten his paws on something. The medical file of Jake. The test outcomes are: Jacob suffers from a rare blood disorder that will. His demise occurred in 3 days. The males offer Jake their protection under 2 stipulations. He must give them all of their money and do whatever they request, including responding to queries. They give him 3 hours to decide, but Jask departs without making a choice. He does not speak because he believes they are attempting to deceive him. The outcomes he achieves at the hospital are the same, but Jaskier believes that Zach and Avi must have paid for the lab. Therefore, he seeks a second opinion from his private physician, who provides the same prognosis. Jake acknowledges he has no money after menacing him with a pistol to ensure he is not also being compensated. After withdrawing money from the bank, she returns to accept the men's offer. As they pass, Avi explains that they are loan scammers and that they will be using Jake's money as collateral. After delivering the money to their first patron, Avi demands that Jake tell him all about his relationship with Matcha. Matcha formerly employed 3 extremely inept individuals known as the 3 Edus. They lost their card player prior to a crucial contest and knew that Jake was a skilled player. Therefore, he was summoned to succeed him. Jake wished to refuse, but Billy's family was imperiled. Therefore, he had to agree to safeguard them. During the game, however, the other males at the table began to raise their hands, offensive to Jake and his mother. Jake refused to accept this, so he began a gunfight. The power went out, the money vanished, and the next thing he knew, his name was deleted. Jake was being interrogated by the authorities. In order to prevent him from speaking, they threatened his niece. His sister-in-law was unintentionally killed while attempting to protect her daughter. Jake did not tell the police that Matcha organized the activities, so he was sentenced to 7 years in prison. During this time, the Eddas infuriated Matcha, resulting in him using them as concrete. After meeting with a number of clients, Zach dispatches Jake to a motel. In the interim, Matcha and underworld overlord Sam Gold is regarded as the eminent figure among all other criminal lords. Want to be like. However, Gold never receives guests, so they meet with his advisor instead, Lily Walker, who agrees to mediate a powder transaction between Matcha and herself. In addition, she reminds him that Gold does not possess favor publicity and second opportunities. Later, Jake provides Zach and Avi with additional funds. While playing chess with Avi, he is questioned about his time in prison. Jake had been given 2 options. He was offered 14 years of typical time or 7 years of seclusion, and he chose the latter. His organ was between 2 individuals who had been there for a long time, a chess maestro and a swindle artist. And although they never spoke, they knew everything about one another. During the 5 years of Jake's sentence, the 3 would send each other handwritten letters. Jake discovered the formula for winning any game in the world from the library's literature. The 2 men planned a prison escape and vowed to bring Jake along. When they ultimately departed, however, they vanished without a word and left Jake behind. 2 years after his parole, he discovered that those two individuals had stolen all of his money. Only a note stating you can only get wiser by battling a smarter opponent was left behind. Therefore, Jake began using the formula to become wealthy at various casinos. As time passes, Jake maintains his employment by visiting various clients and donating his own funds. He's also likely to menace them if they do not pay, but he cannot bring himself to harm innocent, destitute individuals. Avi and Zach are chaining the side of a wall to a vehicle so that it will shatter when they yank said wall and the safe on the opposite side. This safe contains the substance promised by Matcha to Lily. So, when he discovers he's been plundered, he dispatches Paul to solve the situation no matter what. Paul visits their adversary, the Triad Overlord Lord John, who agrees to supply them with the substance on such short notice, but at an exorbitant price. Jake, Zach, Avi, and their group travel to the facility in which the transaction will occur. They slip into a chamber adjacent to the criminals in order to create a breach the wall and administer sleeping gas, rendering both Matcha's and John's soldiers unconscious. Then they rob the money and the powder, framing it to make it appear that John was plundered by Matcha and vice versa. Later, Jake receives a phone call from Billy, who informs him that he has been asking around and has discovered a solution. Zach and Avi are so hazardous that even gold would not approach them. Therefore, Jake should leave the area. Jake doesn't heed and goes back to work, where he's being anticipated having to photograph a terrified prospect. He refuses and attempts to shoot Avi instead, but realizes his mistake. The pistol is unloaded prior to Avi knocking him unconscious. Jake awakens in the motel hours later and receives a Avi calls to inform him that he has survived his third day and that he should see a doctor. Jake visits his doctor after being visited by his niece and Billy, who leave him a gun in case of an emergency, who affirms the incorrect diagnosis and that Jake is healthy. He attempts to contact Avi and demands. Avi refuses to provide answers, stating that he will have to wait. Paul has been compiling information in the interim, and Jake has been implicated in all the problems his men have been experiencing. Therefore, Matcha commands him to murder him. Avi and Zach are waiting for Jake when he returns to the motel, and inform him that Matcha's men are in the room. Jake flees, and the goons pursue him. However, he manages to lose them, particularly when one of the goons accidentally fires himself. The other criminals discover the corpse and assume Jake is responsible. Jake visits Avi and Zach at their home office, where they admit they've always suspected Jake lied to them about his past former arrangement with the Eddies. These three comedians had been awaiting Jake's release from incarceration to murder him, since his actions led to their dismissal by Matcha. In order to save his life, he gave the Eddie struck a deal. He would give them 3% of any money they lent him every month. The initial occasion, one Eddie only consented to it, but when they saw that he honored his agreement, they all wanted in 4% this time around. In reality, Jake was paying each Eddie with another Eddie's funds, so he had no money, wasn't sacrificing anything. They reached a point where they could no longer lend money, so they stopped doing so. Borrowed from Matcha, who became rapidly intrigued by the Eddie's enigmatic moneymaker. After wagering with the formula and becoming wealthy, Jake decided to take a vacation at that time. Accompanied by his brother and niece, Matcha murdered the Eddies for not paying him back. Regarding Matcha, he is having supper at a posh restaurant when his associates arrive. That informed Jake that he has escaped. Sorta recognizes John's admirer posing as a hostess, so he confronts her. Before departing the restaurant to pursue her chauffeur, he murders her. However, his marksmanship is still effective, and he was only able to wound her, not murder her, so before she dies, she manages to discharge Matcha's gun. He severed his finger in the midst of the chaos. Then, Sorter is dispatched to Lord John's hiding place to execute him. With his troops, Jake is still conversing with Zach and Avi while they play golf on a rooftop. They explain to him that no one ever gets to see gold because he doesn't exist. He's just a myth. As a symbol of ego and personification of avarice, he has only power over those who invest in him. Therefore, Jake must alter the principles by which he allows others to control him. Afterward, Jake donates the remainder of his bank funds before slipping into Matcha's residence bedroom. While battling the voices in his mind that represent his ego, Jake apologizes to his parents. Matcha thanks him for defrauding him of his money, acknowledges him as the superior criminal kingpin, and tells him he's superior. Donated in his name before departing, Jacob takes steps to confront his anxieties. The elevator, which becomes stranded on the 13th floor. He has experienced a panic attack while battling it. A mental dialogue in which he denies his ego, leaving the game as a free individual. Once the elevator resumes operation, Jake reaches the ground floor, where Matcha is waiting for him with a pistol, possessed by his ego. However, Jake is content and merely at ease with himself. He strides past him, which drives Matcha insane as he cannot comprehend why anyone would not fear him. As he realizes how profoundly humiliated he is, he begins to weep. Following morning, Paul gives Matcha copies of all the local newspapers so he can see his name in print. Everyone now believes that Jake wasn't lying when he said he made a donation in Matcha's name. The casino proprietor has concern for the local community. Matcha is pleased to accept credit, but his pleasure is tempered. Short-lived, Paul also reveals that Jake has the substance and has been playing them the entire time. Paul, Sorter, and the remaining members of Match's retainers visit Billy, who manages to conceal his daughter from them. He is in the closet when he discovers that one of his bodyguards has betrayed him. Once he is located, the men begin abusing him while interrogating him, refusing to believe that he does not know where he is. They are Jake and the substance. Sorter begins to experience fear as Paul's torture techniques rapidly intensify. Unsettling, particularly when they force the girl out of the closet after hearing her sobs. Refusing to harm a child, Sorter casts aside his ego and proceeds to murder his fellow thugs. Methodical and effective, he makes a fatal error in the end and is slain. Meanwhile, Lily calls upon Matcha. She brings him a wreath sent by Gold, who is not pleased to see Matcha's presence. Since he dislikes publicity, his name is all over the newspapers. Lily also tells him that Matcha's turn has come, is over, and he will not have a second opportunity, causing him to despair once more. Avi and Zach brings Jake and the powder to Matcha's casino, where Avi ultimately wins a game of chess against Jake. While divulging the final details of the narrative, he and Zach were the only males in the group, cells next to Jake's, and they had always wished to take him with them, but he had never been taken away. Jake is willing to embrace the truth, implying that these events have been figments of his imagination. Sadly, he does not have time to come to grips with this because, at that instant, it is already too late. The bodyguards of the casino bring him to Matcha, who is with the woman. After spilling the sacks of powder, Jake assures his niece that everything will be okay, which enraged Matcha because Jake shows no fear despite aiming his gun at him. The pistol was pointed at the infant. The humiliation of Matcha causes the ego voices in his psyche to become audible. Jake draws the conclusion that he cannot harm a deceased man, so he places the pistol to his head and fires.